In my white wedding dress, I watched my father raise his glass before 400 guests and announce I was not his biological child. He cut me off from the fortune while my stepmother smirked. 10 minutes later, she beat me in the bridal suite, leaving bruises on my arms. She did not realize my grandfather was watching from the doorway, silently dialing the one phone number that would destroy their entire 30-year empire before the night was over. My name is Brielle Vaughn. I am 29 years old, an architect, and the owner of a small, struggling design studio, and for the next 3 hours, I was supposed to be the star of the Rivercrest Grand Hotel. I stood just outside the grand ballroom doors, waiting for my cue. The silk lining of the wedding dress felt less like a luxury and more like a high-end cage. Through the ornate glass panels, I could see the room, a sea of Chicago's elite, shimmering under chandeliers that cost more than my apartment. The air was thick with the smell of lilies and money, and something else, an acidic tension that had been brewing for months. My father, Grant Mercer, was in his element. I watched him work the room, his hand clasping the shoulder of a city alderman, his laughter booming across the orchestra's prelude. He was the head of Mercer Transit Group, a logistics and real estate empire, and tonight he was the benevolent patriarch, the picture of success. He looked every inch the tycoon, oblivious to the Cold War that had raged between us for the last year. It's the wedding of the year, the society blogs had called it. They were right, but not for the reasons they thought. A technician hurried past, adjusting the microphone on his lapel. "Livestream is hot in 5, folks." Of course it was. This was not a wedding. It was a media event, a carefully curated piece of corporate theater. I clutched the small silver clutch in my hands. It was heavy, not with lipstick and a compact, but with a single, thick envelope. Inside it was a stack of papers, dense with data and legal seals. A truth so potent, it could level this entire room, this entire family. I ran my thumb over the embossed logo on the flap. If I opened it at the right moment, I could bury not just a marriage, but an empire. The music changed. The coordinator nodded. It was time. The ceremony was a blur of memorized lines and flash photography. I said the words. I smiled. But my focus remained on the clutch, now resting on the table beside my champagne flute. Then came the reception, the dinner, the clinking of glasses, and finally, the moment I knew was coming, the moment the entire evening had been designed to facilitate. Grant Mercer stood up. He tapped his spoon, a delicate tink, 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 against a crystal flute. The sound cut through the room. "If I could have your attention, everyone," he said. His voice was not the warm, fuzzy tone of a proud father. It was the clear, commanding frequency of a CEO addressing his shareholders. "I'd like to say a few words about my daughter." He smiled, a wide, camera-ready flash of white, but the smile never touched his eyes. He looked at me, and the orchestra faded. The live stream cameras, 3 of them, swiveled slowly, like gun turrets, to find my face. I was pinned in the spotlight. "We are here tonight to celebrate family," Grant began, his voice resonating with false sincerity. "Family, legacy, and the blood that binds us." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. And it is in the spirit of that truth, of that honesty, that I want to share something, because a family should have no secrets. He took a sip of champagne. The room was so quiet I could hear the ice shifting in a glass 3 tables away. "Brielle," he locked his gaze on me, "is not my biological child." It was not a gasp. It was a vacuum. The sound of 400 people inhaling at once. The MC, a local news anchor, looked pale. The string quartet stopped, a violin squeaking in shock before falling silent. "She was adopted," Grant continued, his voice gaining strength, savoring the drama. "A child we took in, and I have tried, for nearly 30 years, to love her as my own. But there are lines, and there are bloodlines." He was not just speaking, he was performing an execution. "And so," he declared, raising his glass, As we celebrate this new chapter, it is also a time for clarity, effective immediately. All financial support from the Mercer family is concluded. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. My new husband, Eli, grabbed my hand under the table, his own shock evident. Grant was not finished. Furthermore, as the executor of her mother's will, I will be petitioning the court to review her inheritance, the assets of Mercer Transit Group, the assets my late wife Laura helped build, must and will stay with the true Mercer family. The cameras were on me, unblinking, capturing every nuance of my humiliation. I looked at the VIP table. My stepmother, Vanessa, the former catalog model who had clawed her way to social queen status, was dabbing at her eye with a silk handkerchief, a perfect portrait of feigned sorrow. But as her eyes met mine across the room, she smiled. A small, tight, satisfied smile. Beside her, her son, my stepbrother Logan, raised his glass in a silent, mocking toast. His lips formed the word charity, and he let out a short, sharp laugh. My eyes scanned, searching, until I found him. At the table closest to the stage sat my grandfather, Harold Vaughn, the quiet, enigmatic founder of Mercer Transit Group, the man Grant had systematically erased from the company's public narrative. Harold was gripping his antique wooden cane so tightly his knuckles were white. He was not looking at Grant. He was looking at me, and his eyes were not filled with pity. They were filled with a profound, terrifying disappointment. I couldn't breathe. The lilies, the perfume, the weight of the dress, it was all suffocating me. I stood, my chair scraping loudly on the marble floor. "Excuse me," I whispered to Eli. I need to adjust my makeup." I walked, not ran, away from the table, away from the hundreds of staring eyes, away from the cameras. I pushed through the velvet curtains into the private hallway that led to the bridal suite. The sudden silence was a mercy. I leaned against the flocked wallpaper, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was shaking. "Brielle, darling, are you all right?" Vanessa's voice, like chilled honey. She had followed me. I turned. "Leave me alone, Vanessa." "Oh, I can't do that," she said, gliding closer. She smelled of gin and expensive perfume. "That was just dreadful. Grant can be so brutal. Here," she said, reaching out to fix a piece of my hair, a gesture of mock tenderness. I flinched away from her touch. "Don't!" Her face hardened instantly. The mask of the concerned matriarch dissolved, revealing the cold, hard ambition beneath. "Fine. You should be destroyed. You just lost everything. You ungrateful little stray." "It was never about the money," I seethed. The sound of the slap was sharp, echoing in the narrow hall. My head snapped to the side, my cheek erupting in a hot, stinging pain. "Do not lie to me," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "It has always been about the money for you, with your little studio, pretending you were one of us." She shoved me. I was off balance in the absurd heels, and I stumbled backward, crashing into a small vanity table. Glass bottles rattled. "You think you're so smart," she snarled, grabbing my upper arms, her fingernails digging deep crescents into my skin. "You think you can just exist in our world? Take our name?" She shoved me again, pinning me against the wall. "You are not his real kid. Do you understand me?" She spat the words, her face inches from mine. "You're nothing. You're just the help we forgot to fire." I was 29 years old, a bride in a white dress, and my stepmother was beating me in a hotel hallway. The humiliation burned hotter than the pain on my cheek. I raised my hands to cover my face. A sob of pure rage and shame caught in my throat. It was then, through the small gap between my fingers, that I saw him. Down the hall, standing in the deep shadow of a service alcove, was Harold, my grandfather. He was perfectly still. He did not move to intervene. He did not call out. He just watched, his face a mask of cold observation. Vanessa, lost in her triumphant rage, had her back to him. She did not see him. Harold watched for one long, agonizing second. He saw my dress. He saw the red, blooming mark on my cheek. He saw me, cornered. Then, with an unnerving, deliberate slowness, he reached into the breast pocket of his tuxedo. He did not take his eyes off the scene. He simply withdrew his phone. He unlocked the screen. His thumb moved with practiced calm, scrolling. Even from that distance, I could see the contact he stopped on. It was starred. Langley and Cole, attorney. His thumb pressed the call button. He lifted the phone to his ear. His gaze still fixed on me, a silent witness. I didn't understand. I did not know that name. But as Vanessa pulled her arm back to strike me again, I felt a vibration, a deep, seismic rumble that had nothing to do with the orchestra in the next room. It was the sound of a foundation cracking. It was the sound of a sleeping giant, disturbed at last, and preparing to rise. You might wonder why I stood there in that hallway. You might wonder why a 29-year-old woman, successful in her own right, would let her stepmother strike her across the face without raising a hand in defense. You might think I was frozen by fear, or perhaps conditioned by years of emotional submission. But you would be wrong. I did not strike back because I knew that in the arithmetic of war, a physical retaliation is a momentary satisfaction, whereas a strategic destruction is eternal. To truly understand why I let that slap happen, and why I was carrying a clutch filled with legal dynamite, you have to understand the architecture of the house I grew up in. You have to understand that the rot in the Mercer family did not start at the wedding. It started 2 decades ago, with a car accident and a math problem. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the version of the story that Grant Mercer tried so hard to delete. My mother was Laura Vaughn, before she was a memory that my father tried to scrub from the walls. She was an architect and an urban planner. She was the kind of woman who saw a chaotic intersection and saw a symphony of logistics waiting to be conducted. People forget this now, because Grant has spent millions on PR firms to polish his image as the sole titan of industry. But Mercer Transit Group was not his brainchild. It was theirs. And if we are being technically accurate, it was mostly hers and her father's. When the company was founded, back when it was just a small fleet of trucks and a few warehouses in the industrial district, the equity split was clear. Grant Mercer, the charismatic salesman with the winning smile, held 45%. Laura Vaughn, the operational genius, held 20%. And Harold Vaughn, my grandfather, the silent investor who put up the initial capital, held 30%. The remaining 5% was scattered among small initial stakeholders. That math is important. It is the skeleton key to everything that happened later. I came into the picture when I was 6 years old. The official story, the one Laura told me every night before bed, was that she walked into a center for adoption and saw me sitting in a corner drawing houses with crayons. She told me that she didn't just choose me. She recognized me. She would smooth my hair back and say, "Brielle, you are my life's most beautiful choice." There was never any shame in the word adoption in our house. It was a word that meant intention. It meant I was wanted. My childhood was a golden era of blueprints and graphite dust. While other girls were playing with dolls, I was sitting on the floor of my mother's home office, learning how to read floor plans. She taught me that a building is only as strong as its foundation, and that a contract is only as good as its fine print. She taught me how to organize files, how to date every document, and how to spot the difference between a structural wall and a partition. I did not know it then, but she was training me. She was giving me the tools I would need to survive the demolition of my own life. Then came the year I turned 13. It was a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because I had a geometry test I was worried about. My mother had kissed my forehead in the morning and promised to help me study angles when she got home. She never came home. The police report said it was a tragic accident. Her car, a reliable sedan she had driven for years, had suffered a catastrophic brake failure on the highway. She lost control on a curve and went through the guardrail. It was sudden, it was violent, and it left a hole in the world that was shaped exactly like her. I remember the funeral as a blur of black umbrellas and heavy hands on my shoulders. Grant cried. He wept openly. draping himself over the casket in a display of grief that made the local papers. Everyone said he was a broken man. Everyone said he would never recover. They were wrong. Recovery took exactly 6 months. 6 months after we lowered my mother into the ground, Vanessa Price walked into our house and never walked out. Vanessa was everything my mother was not. My mother was sharp angles, ink-stained fingers, and intellectual depth. Vanessa was soft focus, cashmere blends, and curated perfection. She was a former interior catalog model who had pivoted to becoming a socialite, the kind of woman who treated charity galas like competitive sports. She was beautiful, in a terrifyingly symmetrical way, and she did not come alone. She brought Logan. Logan was 14, a year older than me. He was sulky, entitled, and had the kind of face that adults called handsome and other children instinctively knew to avoid. Grant was infatuated, not just with Vanessa, but with the idea of the ready-made family she offered. He adopted Logan so quickly the ink on the marriage license was barely dry. It was a seamless integration, like swapping out a piece of furniture that didn't quite match the new decor. The erasure began slowly, then all at once. First, the photos in the hallway changed. The candid shots of my mother laughing with cake on her face were replaced by professional studio portraits of Grant, Vanessa, and Logan wearing matching beige sweaters. Then, my mother's office was gutted. I came home from school one day to find contractors carrying out her drafting table, the table where I had learned to draw, the table that still smelled like her vanilla perfume. They replaced it with a mahogany trophy case to display Grant's business awards and Logan's participation trophies from soccer. The house stopped feeling like a home and started feeling like a stage set. Everything was cream and white and terrified of being touched. But the real war was fought at the dinner table. Dinner became a nightly performance of power. Grant sat at the head, naturally. Vanessa sat to his right, Logan sat to his left, and I was placed at the far end, like a guest they were obligated to feed but wished would leave. Grant would ask Logan about his day with the intensity of a Barbara Walters interview. Logan would mumble about video games or a C- on a history quiz, and Grant would nod thoughtfully, praising his potential, his spirit, his leadership qualities. Then, silence would fall. If I tried to speak, to mention that I had aced a math test or finished a complex drawing, Vanessa would smile that thin, icy smile. She would say, "Brielle, dear, let us not boast. It is unbecoming." But Grant was worse. Grant began to deploy a phrase that he would use like a truncheon for the next 15 years. He would look at me, his eyes cold and flat, and say, "You should be grateful, Brielle. You should be grateful you carry the Mercer name. It is a privilege, not a right." He planted the seed early. He wanted me to feel like a squatter in my own life. He wanted me to believe that I was a liability on the balance sheet, a debt that could never be repaid. He stopped being my father and started being my landlord. I watched as Logan was given everything without asking: the newest game consoles, the best tutors, the leniency when he broke curfew. I, on the other hand, was audited. If I needed money for art supplies, I had to submit a written request explaining why it was necessary. If I wanted a new winter coat, I was reminded of how much my private school tuition cost the family. I felt myself shrinking. I felt the ghost of the little girl who drew houses fading away, replaced by a quiet, watchful shadow. But there was one person who saw me: Harold Vaughn. My grandfather had retreated from the world after my mother died. He moved into his old Victorian house on the edge of town and stopped coming to the office. He let Grant run the show. People thought he had gone senile, or perhaps just lost the will to fight, but he still came to the obligatory family holidays. He would sit in the corner of the living room, his hands resting on his cane, his eyes moving back and forth between Grant, Vanessa, and Logan. He rarely spoke. He never intervened when Vanessa made a passive-aggressive comment about my hair or my clothes. He never corrected Grant when he rewrote history to claim he founded the company alone. But sometimes, when the room was loud with their self-congratulatory laughter, I would look up and catch Harold staring at me. His gaze was intense, searching. It felt like he was trying to solve a puzzle. He would look at me, then look at Grant, and a shadow would pass over his face. He looked like a man holding a heavy stone, debating whether to drop it or throw it. He never said a word, not then. The turning point for me, the moment I stopped being a victim and started being a witness, happened when I was 16. I was cleaning out the attic, a chore Vanessa had assigned to me because the cleaning staff was too busy polishing her silver. I found a box of my mother's things that had been missed during the Great Purge. Inside, tucked between old sketches, was a letter she had written to herself about a contract negotiation years ago. It said simply, "Always keep the papers, Laura, because people will always try to rewrite your story. But paper does not forget." I sat on the dusty floorboards and read that line over and over. Downstairs, I could hear Grant laughing at something Logan said. I could hear the clink of crystal glasses. They were rewriting the story. They were writing a story where I was the lucky orphan and they were the benevolent saviors. They were writing a story where Logan was the heir and I was the footnote. I realized then that I could not fight them with words. Words disappear. Words can be twisted. I needed paper. That night, I went to my room. I took an old tin box that used to hold shortbread cookies. I put my mother's letter inside. Then, I went to my computer. I printed out an email Grant had sent me earlier that week, denying my request for a school trip because it was an unnecessary expense, despite him buying Logan a dirt bike the day before. I folded the email. I put it in the box. It was a small act, a trivial act, but as the lid clicked shut, I felt a shift in the tectonic plates of my soul. I was not just taking abuse anymore. I was collecting evidence. Over the next 13 years, that box became a filing cabinet, then a safe, then an encrypted server. I saved everything, every dismissive email, every contradictory instruction, every receipt that showed the disparity between Logan's allowance and mine. I saved the birthday cards Grant signed with his secretary's stamp. I saved the legal notices. I became a librarian of my own trauma. I learned to smile at the dinner table. I learned to say thank you when Grant told me I was lucky to have a roof over my head. I learned to endure Vanessa's backhanded compliments. I let them believe they had broken me. I let them believe I was weak, grateful, and stupid. Because I knew something they did not. I knew that the Mercer Empire was built on a foundation that belonged to Laura Vaughn, and I knew that eventually, if you wait long enough, even the most careful liar will make a mistake on paper. So when I stood in that hotel hallway, and Vanessa's hand connected with my cheek, I did not cry for the little girl who lost her mother. I did not cry for the teenager who was treated like a burden. I looked at her, and I looked at my grandfather dialing that phone number, and I felt a cold, hard satisfaction. The tin box was full, the evidence was gathered, and for the first time in 29 years, the math was about to change. If you want to understand how a family becomes a crime scene, do not look for blood on the floor. Look at the bank statements. Look at the tuition bills. Look at the silence between the lines of a birthday card. The violence that broke the Mercer family was not sudden. It was a slow, bureaucratic strangulation that lasted for nearly a decade. It began in earnest when the college acceptance letters arrived. I had applied to the Lakeshore Interdisciplinary Design Institute. It was one of the most rigorous architecture programs in the country, a place where they chewed up students and spit out visionaries. I got in. Not only did I get in, but I received a merit scholarship that covered 30% of the tuition. I remember holding that thick envelope in the hallway, feeling a surge of pride that made my hands shake. For a moment, I forgot the Cold War in my house. I thought, surely, this is undeniable. Surely, this proves I am worth investing in. Logan applied to Northport University. Northport was a fine school. If your primary academic interest was beer pong and networking with other sons of mid-level executives, he was accepted into the supply chain management program, a course load he would eventually struggle to pass even with paid tutors doing half his work. The financial conversation happened in Grant's study. I walked in with my acceptance letter and a meticulously prepared spreadsheet of costs. showing how my scholarship reduced the burden. Grant was sitting behind his mahogany desk, signing checks. He barely glanced at my spreadsheet. He said, "Brielle, this is an expensive hobby." I told him it was not a hobby. I told him it was architecture. I told him it was the same degree my mother had. Grant put his pen down. He looked at me with that practiced boardroom patience that always made me feel small. He said, "Your mother had natural talent, and she had a trust fund. You have neither." Then he outlined the plan for the fall. For Logan, the Mercer estate would cover full tuition, room and board in the luxury off-campus suites, a monthly allowance that was higher than the salary of most entry-level teachers, and a private tutor to ensure he stayed academically eligible. Oh, and a brand new SUV, because Grant did not want him driving a safe, used car in the winter. When I asked about my tuition, Grant turned to his computer. He typed for a moment, then hit send. "Check your inbox," he said. I pulled out my phone. An email had arrived. It was not a confirmation of a bank transfer. It was a PDF guide to applying for federal student loans. He said, "You need to learn independence. Brielle, money is a tool for those who will carry the legacy. Investing in Logan is investing in the company. Investing in you is, well, it is charity. You are 18 now. Sink or swim." I sank into debt. I took out the maximum loans. I worked nights at a coffee shop near campus, smelling of roasted beans and desperation while I built models of skyscrapers until 3 a.m. I swam, but I swam with weights on my ankles. The disparity became a public spectacle 3 years later, when we turned 21. For Logan, Grant rented the Lady Mercer, the flagship yacht of the company's corporate entertainment fleet. It was a black-tie affair on Lake Michigan. There were 200 guests, a DJ flown in from Miami, and an ice sculpture carved in the shape of a logistics truck. The local society magazine ran a 4-page spread titled "The Air Ascendant," featuring photos of Logan spraying champagne over a crowd of cheering sycophants. For my 21, 2 weeks later, we had dinner at the house, just the 4 of us. The cook had the night off, so Vanessa picked up a sheet cake from the supermarket on her way home from the spa. It was dry, and the frosting was a garish blue that stained your teeth. We sat in the dining room, the silence heavy enough to choke on. Grant spent the entire meal texting on his BlackBerry. Logan was hungover, nursing a glass of water and ignoring me. When it came time to sing, Vanessa smiled that tight, chemical smile of hers. She raised her glass of wine and said, "Happy birthday, Brianna. We are so proud of you." She called me Brianna. I looked at her. I looked at Grant to see if he would correct her. He did not even look up from his phone. He just hummed in agreement. I cut the cake, I ate a slice, and later that night, I went back to my dorm room, logged into my student loan portal, and watched the interest accrue. But the most damaging weapon they used was not silence. It was email. Grant loved email. He loved the distance it provided. He could be cruel without having to look you in the eye. During my senior year, I won the State Horizon Award for a design I created for sustainable low-income housing. It was a prestigious honor. My professors were ecstatic. I forwarded the announcement to Grant, hoping, stupidly, for a crumb of validation. He replied 3 hours later. The subject line was, "Award." The body of the email read, "That is nice, Brielle, but do not let these little academic trophies go to your head. Real estate is a blood sport for the alphas, not a charity drive for the dreamers. Do not forget that you are not blood of this house. Keep your expectations low so you do not have to deal with the disappointment later." I stared at the screen. You are not blood of this house. Most people would have deleted that email. They would have dragged it to the trash to avoid seeing it again. But I was my mother's daughter. I remembered the tin box. I printed the email. I bought a filing cabinet for my small, drafty apartment. I created a folder labeled Correspondence, Grant. I punched holes in the paper, and I filed it away. That was the day the archive truly began. I started printing everything. Every passive-aggressive text message from Vanessa about my clothing choices. Every financial document Grant sent me justifying why he could not help with rent. Every receipt I found in the trash when I visited home, showing the obscene amounts of money they spent on Logan's gambling debts or Vanessa's jewelry. I did not know what I was building. I just knew I felt safer when the paper was in the folder. It was a dossier of cruelty. After graduation, I made a mistake. I went to work for them. I told myself it was to gain experience. I told myself it was to be close to my mother's legacy. But deep down, I think I still wanted to prove them wrong. I wanted to show Grant that I was the asset he needed. I was hired as a junior design associate at Mercer Transit Group. My salary was 20% lower than the market average for a graduate from a top-tier school. I checked. I printed the market research comparisons and filed them in a folder labeled Employment Discrepancies. For 3 years, I worked 80-hour weeks. Mercer Transit was expanding its logistics hubs across the Midwest, and they needed modern, efficient distribution centers. I designed them. I spent nights hunched over blueprints, optimizing traffic flow, calculating load-bearing capacities, and ensuring LEED certification compliance. The new hub in Columbus, Ohio, was my masterpiece. I solved a zoning issue that had stalled the project for months. I designed a cantilevered roof system that saved the company $2 million in steel costs. When the ribbon-cutting ceremony arrived, I stood in the back of the crowd, wearing a hard hat and holding a clipboard. Grant stood at the podium. He beckoned Logan to the stage. Logan, who had visited the site exactly twice, once to use the bathroom and once to complain about the mud on his shoes. Grant beamed at the cameras. He said, "This facility is a testament to the vision of the next generation. I want to thank my son, Logan, our Vice President of Development, for spearheading this design. His innovative thinking is what drives Mercer forward." The applause was polite. The flashbulbs popped. Logan waved, looking the part of the young genius, accepting credit for a roof he could not even describe, let alone design. The next day, the industry trade journals ran the story. Mercer Air revolutionizes logistics design. I was mentioned in the last paragraph. Design support provided by B. Vaughn. I did not quit that day. I went to my desk. I downloaded the original CAD files for the project, the ones with my digital signature and timestamps on every layer. I downloaded the email chain where I explained the roof concept to a confused Logan. I downloaded the meeting minutes where Grant approved my design changes. I burned them onto a hard drive. I printed the hard copies. I filed them under intellectual property theft. Then I quit. I walked into Grant's office and put my resignation letter on his desk. He laughed. He actually laughed. He said, "You are making a mistake. Brielle, you are nothing without the Mercer platform. You think you can survive out there as a freelancer? You are a support player. You are not a lead." I told him I was starting my own firm, Vaughn Studio. His face went purple. He slammed his hand on the desk. He called it an act of disloyalty. He called it a betrayal of the hand that fed me, ignoring the fact that the hand had been starving me for years. He said, "You will regret this." He made sure of it. When I started Vaughn's studio, I had a verbal agreement with the operations director at Mercer, a man who actually liked my work, to continue doing freelance subcontracting for their smaller depots. It was supposed to be my lifeline while I built a client base. 2 days after I left, the operations director called me, sounding embarrassed. He said the contracts were pulled. Grant had issued a directive: no external vendors with the last name Vaughn. I survived on small residential renovations. I designed kitchens and porch extensions, while Logan was featured in Forbes 30 Under 30 for work I had done. But then, the sabotage became active. I bid on a public contract for the Riverfront Revitalization Project. It was a perfect fit for my studio. My proposal was tight, cost-effective, and beautiful. I had inside information that the city council loved it. Then, at the last minute, a new bid came in. It was from a company called Apex Logistics Solutions. They undercut my price by exactly $5,000. It was a suspiciously specific number. I lost the bid. I did some digging, Apex Logistics Solutions was a shell company registered 3 weeks prior. The registered agent was a lawyer I recognized. He was Logan's fraternity brother. And the funding source for the bond? A subsidiary of Mercer Transit Group. They were not just ignoring me anymore, they were hunting me. I started noticing other things. Strange hang-ups on my office line. Emails from potential clients that suddenly went cold after they mentioned knowing my father. I realized that Grant and Vanessa were running a whisper campaign. They were telling developers that I was difficult, that I was unstable, that I had been fired from Mercer for incompetence. It was terrifying, but it was also clarifying. I stopped trying to win them over. I stopped trying to be the good daughter. I became a forensic accountant of my own life. I bought a professional-grade scanner. I recorded every phone call, taking advantage of the one-party consent laws in Illinois. When Logan called me, drunk at 2 a.m, to brag about a new contract he barely understood, I let the tape roll. He slurred, "You know, Dad says we are just gonna starve you out. Just squeeze until you pop. It's business. Bree, nothing personal, just business." I saved the file. I backed it up to the cloud. I backed it up to an external drive. I printed the transcript. I looked at my wall of filing cabinets. It had grown from 1 drawer to 4. It contained the history of a theft, the theft of my tuition, my credit, my reputation, and my mother's legacy. I did not wake up every morning planning revenge. I did not have a vision board of their destruction. I simply learned the most important lesson Laura Vaughn ever taught me. The lesson that Grant Mercer forgot because he was too arrogant to believe he could be held accountable. Paper trails are immortal. I learned not to delete. I learned that trash folders are recoverable. I learned that metadata tells a story that a press release cannot. So when I stood in that bridal suite years later, clutching that silver bag, I wasn't just holding a few sheets of paper. I was holding the weight of 1,000 files. I was holding the student loans I was still paying off. I was holding the blue frosting of a supermarket cake. I was holding the blueprints of the Columbus hub. They thought they were erasing me, but all they were doing was creating a paper trail that led straight back to their own throats. By the time I turned 28, the Vaughn studio was not just a business. It was a sinking ship, and I was bailing water with a teaspoon. I remember sitting in my office late one Tuesday night, the only light coming from the glow of my laptop and the street lamps filtering through the blinds. The air conditioning had been turned off hours ago to save money, and the room was stifling. On my desk sat a payroll spreadsheet that refused to balance. I had 8 employees, 8 talented, hardworking designers and junior architects who had trusted me with their careers. They had mortgages, they had student loans, and I had exactly 48 hours to figure out how to pay them. The irony was suffocating. Technically, on paper, I was a multimillionaire. My mother, Laura, had left a will. It was a document she had drafted with meticulous care 5 years before her death. In it, she bequeathed to me a trust fund valued at $3 million and, more importantly, her 20% stake in Mercer Transit Group. That 20% was not just money. It was a seat at the table. It was veto power. It was a voice. But a will is only as good as the executor who enforces it, and the executor was Grant Mercer. For nearly a decade, Grant had kept my inheritance in a legal stranglehold. His argument was as insulting as it was baseless. He claimed that Laura had been mentally fragile in the years leading up to her accident, suggesting she was not of sound mind when she updated her estate plan. He painted my brilliant, sharp-witted mother as a confused woman who had been manipulated, presumably by her own affection for her adopted daughter. Grant had the resources to drag this out until the end of time. He hired Langley & Cole, the most aggressive corporate litigation firm in Chicago. They buried my small, strip mall lawyer in motions, depositions, and continuances. Every time we got close to a hearing, they found a new procedural loop to jump through. My legal fees were eating me alive. I was bleeding cash to fight for money that was rightfully mine, while Grant used the profits from my mother's own company to pay the lawyers who were blocking me from accessing it. It was a perfect, self-sustaining engine of oppression. I was staring at a past due rent notice when my phone buzzed. It was Vanessa. The text was characteristically brief and pretended to be warm. Brielle, darling, come by the house for tea tomorrow at 3. We need to clear the air. Just us girls. I should have said no. I should have known better. But desperation makes you hope for miracles. Even from monsters. I thought maybe, just maybe. Grant was tired of the legal bills too. Maybe they were ready to settle. I drove to the Mercer estate the next afternoon. The house looked even more imposing than I remembered. A sprawling neoclassical beast of limestone and manicured hedges. I parked my 7-year-old sedan next to Vanessa's brand-new luxury SUV and walked up the steps. Vanessa was waiting for me in the solarium. It was a room I used to love, filled with exotic ferns and morning light. But Vanessa had redecorated it. Now it was cold, filled with white marble and sharp-edged furniture that looked uncomfortable to sit on. She did not pour the tea. She had a housekeeper do it, then dismissed the woman with a flick of her wrist. "You look tired." "Brielle," she said, taking a delicate sip of her Earl Grey. "The bag's under your eyes. Are you sleeping?" "I am working, Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice steady, trying to keep my business afloat. She sighed, setting her cup down with a soft clink. "That is actually why I asked you here. Grant and we worry about you. We hate seeing you struggle like this. It is embarrassing for the family to have you living on the edge of poverty." I gripped my purse strap. "Then tell Grant to release my trust. Tell him to stop blocking the transfer of my shares." Vanessa smiled. It was a pitying smile, the kind you give to a slow child. "It is not that simple," she said. "You know Grant feels a deep responsibility to protect Laura's legacy. He cannot just hand over 20% of a billion-dollar company to someone who lacks the pedigree for high-stakes business." She reached under a stack of fashion magazines on the table and pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. She slid it across the marble toward me. "But," she continued, "we have a solution, a generous one." I looked at the document. It was a settlement agreement. "Grant is willing to release a one-time cash payment to you," she explained. $500,000. It is enough to pay off your little studio's debts. Buy a nice condo, maybe take a vacation. You look like you need a vacation." I opened the document to the terms page. My eyes scanned the legal jargon. In exchange for a lump sum of $500,000, the beneficiary, Brielle Vaughn, agrees to irrevocably waive all claims to the Laura Vaughn Trust and assigns all equity interest in Mercer Transit Group to Logan Mercer. I looked up at her. "To Logan?" Vanessa nodded, her eyes gleaming. "Well, obviously, Logan is the future CEO. It makes sense for the shares to be consolidated in his hands. We need to ensure the company remains secure. We need to keep the control within the family." There it was, the invisible wall. I closed the folder and pushed it back. "I am not signing this. That 20% is worth hundreds of millions. You are offering me pennies." Vanessa's face hardened. The mask of concern evaporated, replaced by the steel I knew lay beneath. "It is not about the value, Brielle," she snapped. "It is about the legitimacy. You are holding hostage shares that belong to the bloodline." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a hiss. "Let's be honest with each other for once. You are a lovely girl, in your own way, but you are not a Mercer. You never were. You were Laura's project. Grant indulged her. But now that she is gone, we need to correct the record. We need to keep the empire in the hands of those with real blood." Real blood. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. It was the weapon they had bludgeoned me with since I was 13. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but I locked my knees. "I will see you in court, Vanessa." She laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. "Oh, Brielle, grow up. Do you think a judge in this town is going to side with a failing architect against Grant Mercer? Grant plays golf with the presiding judge. He funded the re-election campaign of the probate magistrate. If you walk out of here, you get nothing. We will bleed you dry until you are begging for that $500,000. I walked out. I did not look back. I heard her calling after me. Something about being an ungrateful stray, but the roaring in my ears drowned her out. I drove aimlessly for an hour, blinded by tears of rage, I was trapped. She was right. They had the money, the power, and the connections. I was going to lose the studio. I was going to lose my mother's legacy. Then, I remembered the phone call. 2 weeks ago, my grandfather Harold had called me. It was a short, cryptic conversation. He had sounded frail, his voice raspy over the line. He had said, "Brielle, if the walls ever feel like they are closing in, go to Lakeside Trust. Ask for box number 402. I put your name on the access list the day you turned 18. It is time you read what your mother left for you." At the time, I had been too busy with work to go. Now, with Vanessa's threat ringing in my ears, it felt like the only door left open. I drove to downtown Chicago. Lakeside Trust was an old bank, a fortress of granite and iron that felt like it belonged in a different century. The air inside was cool and smelled of polished brass and old money. I showed my ID to the clerk. He checked a ledger, nodded, and led me down a marble staircase into the vault. The heavy steel door swung open with a silent, well-oiled grace. Box 402. The clerk unlocked his side, I unlocked mine, and he slid the long metal drawer out. He carried it to a small private viewing room and left me alone. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I sat down at the wooden table and opened the lid. It was not full of cash, it was full of order. There were stacks of bonds, wrapped in bands. I did a quick mental calculation. There was enough here to keep the studio running for a year, maybe 2. Harold must have been funneling his own dividends into this box for a decade. There was a small velvet pouch containing my mother's pearl necklace, the one she wore in her wedding photos, the one Vanessa had claimed was lost during the move. But underneath the bonds and the jewelry was a thick manila envelope. On the front, in my mother's sharp, architectural handwriting, was my name, Brielle, and underneath, "Read this when you are strong enough to handle the truth." I broke the wax seal. My hands were trembling so hard I almost tore the paper. A letter slid out. It was dated 3 months before she died. "My dearest Brielle, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it likely means Grant has shown you exactly who he is. I am sorry. I wanted to protect you from the ugliness of this world, but I suspect by now you have seen it firsthand. You have always been observant. You have always known how to look at a structure and see where the load-bearing walls are, but there are things about this family's foundation that even I did not see until it was almost too late. Grant is a man obsessed with ownership. He believes that blood is the only title deed that matters. He has spent his life trying to prove that he is the king, and that I was just the consort. But you need to know that his obsession led him to dark places. There is a project, a secret initiative that Grant authorized without the board's approval. He calls it Project Legacy. He buried the costs under research and development for the logistics division, but it has nothing to do with trucks or shipping lanes. You need to find Dr. Mira Collins. She works at GenAxis Biolabs. She was an old friend of mine from university. Before I switched to architecture, she holds the key. She holds the proof of what Grant did. Do not trust what they tell you about who you are. Do not let them define your worth by their twisted definition of biology. The truth is in the data, Brielle, and the data does not lie. I love you. You are my daughter. You are my heir. Fight them. Love, Mom. I wiped the tears from my face. Project Legacy. GenAxis Biolabs. I reached back into the envelope. There was more. There was a silver USB drive, sleek and heavy, and there was a folded document, clipped together. I unfolded it. The header read, Mercer, Internal Genetic Testing 2017. Summary report. I did the math. I was 21 then. That was the year Logan had his flashy yacht party. That was the year Grant had sent me that cruel email about not being blood of this house. I flipped through the pages. It was dense with medical terminology, charts of alleles and markers, but the last page was a non-disclosure agreement. It was signed by Grant Mercer. It was signed by Vanessa Mercer. And it was signed by Dr. Mira Collins, with a handwritten note in the margin. Testing completed as requested. Samples destroyed per instruction. Results delivered to client only. I stared at the paper. The room felt suddenly very small. Why? Why would Grant Mercer, a man who publicly and privately screamed about the sanctity of his bloodline, conduct a secret genetic test on his family 8 years ago? If he was so sure Logan was his son, and so sure I was adopted, why did he need a lab to prove it? And why bury the results in a safety deposit box protected by a non-disclosure agreement? If the test confirmed what he always said, that Logan was his and I was not, he would have framed it. He would have put it on a billboard. He would have slapped it on the table in front of me at dinner. He didn't. He hid it. A cold chill went down my spine, sharper than the air conditioning in the vault. He hid it because the results did not say what he wanted them to say. I put the letter, the USB drive, and the file back into the envelope. I placed the bonds in my purse. Vaughn's studio would survive tomorrow. But the real weapon was the envelope under my arm. I walked out of the bank and into the blinding afternoon sun of Chicago. The city looked the same, but the world had shifted. Vanessa had threatened me with judges and poverty because she thought I was defenseless. She thought I was just an architect with a crumbling business. She didn't know I had just found the blueprints to their destruction. Grant was obsessed with blood? Fine. I was going to give him exactly what he wanted. I was going to trace every drop of it, right back to the source. And I had a feeling that when I did, the real blood he worshipped would turn out to be the poison that killed him. Genaxis Biolabs was not a place you found by accident. It was tucked away in a sterile suburban office park, nestled between a data storage company and a private wealth management firm. Its architecture was intentionally forgettable, a cube of brushed steel and smoked glass, with no name on the building directory. It was the kind of place that charged a fortune to make inconvenient truths disappear, or to create new ones. I had called the number from my mother's letter. A crisp, automated voice had asked for a file number. I typed in the sequence from the Project Legacy cover sheet. The line clicked, and a human being answered. Dr. Collins' office. How can I help you? My name is Brielle Vaughn, I said, my voice sounding thin. I'm calling about my mother, Laura Vaughn. There was a pause. Then, we've been expecting your call for some time. Miss Vaughn, can you be here at 10 tomorrow? I walked through the automatic glass doors at 10 a.m. sharp. The interior was like a high-end spa, all muted blues and pale wood, with the faint, clean scent of ozone. A receptionist with a headset smiled, took my name, and gestured to a private elevator. Dr. Collins is waiting for you on the 3rd floor. The elevator opened directly into an office. A woman was standing by the window, looking out over a small, manicured rock garden. She was perhaps in her late 60s, with a sharp, intelligent face and hair pulled back in a severe graying bun. She wore a white lab coat as if it were a military uniform. She turned as the doors opened, and her expression softened. The clinical mask dissolved, and her eyes, a piercing blue, filled with a sudden, unguarded warmth. My God, she whispered, stepping forward. You are Laura, all over again. The eyes, the set of the jaw. It's like watching the past walk through the door. She held out a hand. Her grip was firm. I'm Mira Collins. Your mother and I were in the same doctoral program at U of C, before she decided buildings were more logical than cell structures. I was a bridesmaid at her first wedding. The wedding to my father, I said. Yes, Mira said, her smile tightening. The wedding to Grant, she gestured to a chair. Please, sit. Tea, coffee, something stronger? Just water, thank you. She poured the water herself from a sleek pitcher. Your mother was a brilliant woman, Brielle, the most brilliant I ever knew, and the most cautious, which is why we are here. Project Legacy, I said, getting straight to it. I didn't want to make small talk. Mira nodded. She walked to a large, biometric-locked filing cabinet that looked more like a bank vault. She pressed her thumb to a scanner, then her palm. The cabinet hissed open. She retrieved a heavy navy blue file binder, bound with a thick red ribbon and sealed with a heavy wax impression of the Genaxis logo. This is not a copy, Mira said, placing it on the desk between us. This is the original chain of evidence file, kept in a climate-controlled, legally compliant archive for the last 7 years, as per your mother's direct instructions. She paid for its storage annually, in advance, through a private trust. She wanted to make sure that when you were ready for this, there would be no question of its authenticity. I touched the wax seal. What am I ready for, Doctor? The truth, Mira said, sitting opposite me. Let's start with what you know. In 2017, Grant Mercer came to me. He was agitated, ranting, as he often did, about legacy, about blood, about making sure his empire went to the right hands. He told me he was restructuring his will, and before he transferred a massive block of shares to his heir, he needed definitive proof of paternity for his son, Logan. So he tested Logan, I said, feeling the pieces click into place. He did, Mira said, but Grant is a paranoid man. He didn't just bring Logan in for a blood draw. He tried to be clever. He also brought 2 items in a sealed evidence bag, a hairbrush and an electric toothbrush. He claimed they were his own, that he wanted a baseline genetic profile for his own medical records, separate from the paternity test. Mira leaned forward. I've known Grant for 30 years. Brielle, I've known him to be a liar for 31. I knew those samples weren't his. They were female. I ran the tests he requested, but I also ran a full comparative panel, for my own, and for Laura's. Peace of mind. He was testing you. Brielle, he was secretly running a paternity test on his adopted daughter at the same time he was verifying his son. He needed a reason, I breathed. He was looking for a paper justification to disown me. Precisely, Mira said. He wanted a document from a certified lab that said Logan, son, Brielle, other. He wanted to put it in a vault and use it as a weapon if you ever challenged him. She slid the heavy binder to me. Break the seal. My hands were shaking. I snapped the ribbon and broke the wax. The binder opened with a soft thud. It was divided into 2 sections. Section 1, Logan Mercer. Section 2, Brielle Vaughn. Look at Section 1, Mira said quietly. I opened it. It was a long report, full of charts I didn't understand, but at the very end was a summary page, a single, brutal paragraph. Analysis of alleles, compared with paternal subject Grant Mercer. Result: paternity is excluded. Probability of paternity, 0%. 0. I looked up at Mira, my mind blank. This means... Grant is not his father, Mira confirmed. Logan Mercer, the heir apparent, the real blood of the Mercer line, shares no genetic material with Grant Mercer. I felt a dizzying rush. Then who? Mira turned to her computer, typed a few commands, and a second set of data appeared on a large monitor on the wall. Grant has a small, private family file with us for hereditary medical screenings. It includes his own data and that of his late parents. It also includes a sample from his younger brother, Darren. Uncle Darren? I said. He died before I was born. A boating accident. My mother said. That's the one, Mira said. A convenient tragedy. Grant was furious when Laura insisted on adding Darren's sample to the medical file. But she insisted on being thorough. Look. She highlighted a line on the screen. We ran Logan's unknown paternal markers against Darren Mercer's profile. The screen flashed. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. It took me a second. Then the breath left my body in a single, painful whoosh. Oh, my God. Vanessa and Darren. It appears so, Mira said. Vanessa was sleeping with her husband's younger brother. Logan is the result of that affair. Darren died before the child was born, so the secret was safe. Grant has spent the last 28 years raising his nephew, believing he was his son, all while Vanessa, presumably, knew the truth and pushed her child, the child of the wrong brother, as the one true heir. And Grant? I thought of all the years, all the praise heaped on Logan, all the talk of blood. He never knew. He's been living a lie, He has, Mira said. But that, Brielle, is not the biggest lie in this file. She pointed to the binder. Section 2. I opened the second tab. Brielle Vaughn. My hands were numb. I turned the pages, past the charts, to the summary. I was expecting the same result. 0%. The paper confirmation of what I had been told my entire life. I read the words. Analysis of a layless, compared with paternal subject Grant Mercer. Result? Paternity is confirmed. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. The room tilted. The numbers swam. No, I whispered. That's not possible. I'm adopted. I was adopted when I was 6. My mother told me the story, the center, the beautiful choice. The story was true, Brielle. The adoption was real. The legal documents are all in order. You are legally adopted. Then this is a mistake. The data does not make mistakes, Mira said gently. Your mother, Laura, and your father, Grant, had you before they were married. You were born out of wedlock. It was complicated. Grant was in the middle of an absolutely brutal divorce from his first wife, a woman he'd been married to for less than a year. She was Vanessa before Vanessa was. She was trying to lay claim to his assets, to a company that wasn't even built yet. Your mother, Laura, was pregnant. Mira stood and walked back to the window. They were terrified that this ex-wife would try to use you, a newborn, as leverage, that she would try to claim you were an asset of the marriage, or that she would tie you up in custody battles just to bleed Grant dry. So they, with Harold's legal team, made a choice, a radical one. They hid you. They used their connections to place you in a private adoption home under a different name. They finalized the divorce, and then, 6 years later, when the dust had fully settled and the ex-wife was remarried and long gone, Laura and Grant went and formally, legally, adopted their own daughter. The breath I was holding came out as a sob. They did it to protect me. It was the ultimate legal shield, Mira said. They created a paper wall so high no one could ever touch you. The adoption was an act of love. Brielle, an act of protection. But, Grant, I stammered, my head pounding. He uses it as a weapon, not blood. The stray, does he not remember? Mira's face darkened. Oh, I think he remembers, or at least he did. But Grant has a talent for rewriting history to suit his narrative. When Vanessa came into the picture, with her own son, it became very convenient for Grant to forget the why of your adoption and focus only on the fact of it. It was easier to believe his own lie, that you were the adopted one and Logan was the blood, because it justified his new family. He got so lost in the lie. I think he willed the truth away. So when he did this test, I said, touching the file, he was just trying to get a medical confirmation of his own lie. Exactly, Mira said. He was expecting 2 reports, one saying, Logan, yes, one saying, Brielle, no. Imagine his shock when he received the exact opposite. My mother, I said, a new thought dawning. She knew about this, the letter. She saw these results. She did, Mira said. Grant, in his arrogance, left the file on his desk. Laura found it. She came to me that night, right here in this office. She was shaking. She was holding these papers, and she was crying. He knows, she said. He knows, and he's still doing it. He's still treating her like an outcast, and he's still pushing Logan as the heir. She realized then that Grant wasn't just cruel. He was actively malicious. He knew you were his, and he chose to deny you. Why didn't she use it? I cried. Why didn't she stop him? She was terrified, Mira said. She was a planner, Brielle, not a destroyer. She looked at this file and she saw a bomb. She knew that if she used it, it wouldn't just hurt Grant and Vanessa. It would destroy the company she had built. It would destroy Logan, who, for all his faults, was still just a boy then. And she was afraid of Grant. He wasn't the man she married anymore, she told me. He's capable of anything. Mira, if I do this, he'll find a way to hurt her. So she did the only thing she could. She planned. She had me create this chain of evidence file. She put the copy in your vault, and she made me promise to keep the original safe until you were ready. She said, "One day, Brielle will be strong enough to decide what to do. She will be stronger than I am. She will know how to use it." I closed the binder. The weight of it was immense. I was the real kid. I was the only kid. The entire story of my life, the foundation of my identity, had been a lie, built on top of a truth, built on top of a lie. I was the biological, rightful heir, who had been legally disowned with a tool meant to protect me. Logan was the product of an affair, a nephew passed off as a son, who had been illegally promoted as the heir. We were both victims, but only one of us was about to burn the whole house down. I stood up, tucking the heavy binder under my arm. "Thank you, Dr. Collins, for everything, for keeping this, for my mother." "Laura was a good friend," Mira said, her eyes sad, "and a brilliant architect. She designed a flawless structure. Brielle, don't be afraid to pull the pin on the load-bearing wall." I walked out of Gen Axis Biolabs into the bright, unfeeling sunshine. I didn't drive back to my office. I drove to a park overlooking the lake. I sat on a bench for a long time, the binder heavy on my lap. I could just walk away. The bonds in my purse were enough to save my studio. I could take this truth, this file, and just live. I could live, knowing who I was, and knowing they were fools. I didn't have to detonate the bomb. I could just hold it, a private victory, a secret shield. I truly believe I might have let them have their hollow, fraudulent lives. I might have just taken my mother's shares and built my own world, separate from theirs. But that was before the wedding. That was before I stood in a hallway, in a white dress, and felt the sting of Vanessa's hand on my face. That was before she spat those words, the only words in the entire English language that were, in fact, a complete and total lie. "You're not his real kid." She had no idea. She had no idea what she had just done. 1 week before the wedding, the final act of the charade began. Grant summoned me to a family meeting. This was not a casual invitation. It was a formal summons via his executive assistant. 4 p.m., the main study. Attendance was mandatory. When I arrived, the room was arranged not for a family but for an acquisition. Grant was behind his massive desk, a king on his throne. Vanessa was seated to his left, in a high-backed chair, looking like a vulture who had mistaken herself for a queen. Logan was slumped in a corner, staring at his phone, already bored with a proceeding he barely understood. And in the darkest corner, near the unlit fireplace, sat Harold. His presence was a surprise. He had not been to the main house in months. He just sat, his cane resting between his knees, his eyes fixed on the empty space in the middle of the room. I took the one remaining chair, a stiff-backed armchair placed directly in front of Grant's desk, like a defendant's seat. "Brielle," Grant started, all business. He did not ask how I was. He did not mention the impending wedding. "We are here to finalize the family transition. We want to do this cleanly, without any more unnecessary legal drama." "Transition," I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "That sounds corporate." "It is corporate," Vanessa interjected, her voice sharp. "This family is a corporation, Brielle, and you have been a non-performing asset for long enough." Grant held up a hand, silencing her, though he did not disagree. He slid a familiar blue-bound document across the desk. It was a new version of the settlement Vanessa had offered me, but it looked heavier, more final. "We are prepared to make you a final, generous offer," Grant said, "in light of your situation with your studio and as a gesture of goodwill for your wedding." I did not touch the document. "What's the offer, Grant?" "You sign away all claims, the trust, the 20%. You sign it all over to Logan, where it belongs. In return, I will personally guarantee that Mercer Transit signs 3 small depot design contracts with Vaughn's studio over the next 18 months. It's just enough to keep your lights on. Pay your little staff. You get to keep your hobby, and the family assets stay where they belong. With the real Mercers, I said. It was not a question. Exactly, Vanessa said, smiling. She looked directly at Logan. Big clients, our partners. They need to know they are dealing with the real thing. They trust the Mercer name when it's backed by the Mercer blood. I felt the weight of the Project Legacy file, a copy of which was in my laptop bag at my feet. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the lie was almost impressive. I looked at Grant. So, let me be clear. You are offering to pay me to do work I already did, using scraps from my mother's company, if I agree to give her entire legacy to him. Logan looked up from his phone, finally registering he was being discussed. Hey, I earned my spot. You earned nothing, I said, my voice quiet, cutting through the entitlement. Brielle, this is not a negotiation, Grant said, his patience snapping. This is a statement. This is what is happening. Sign the paper. No. What did you say? Grant asked, leaning forward. No, I'm not signing it. I reached into my bag, but I did not pull out the DNA file. I pulled out a different folder, one I had prepared. It was thin, containing only 3 sheets of paper. I tossed them onto the desk. I'm not signing anything, and frankly, I'm tired of this narrative you've built. The charity case narrative. Grant picked up the papers. His face, which had been set in a mask of bored superiority, flickered. He turned white. Vanessa leaned over to see. It was the printed email, the one he had sent me when I was 21. Do not forget that you are not blood of this house. Keep your expectations low. You kept this? Grant whispered, looking at the paper as if it were a snake. I keep everything, I said. I have the emails about the Columbus hub. I have the audio of Logan bragging about starving me out. I have the invoices from Apex Logistics Solutions, the shell company you funded to steal the riverfront contract from me. I have, as my mother taught me, the papers. The room was silent. Logan looked confused. Grant looked, for the first time in his life, genuinely trapped. Then Vanessa moved. She shot out of her chair so fast I barely had time to react. She lunged, not at my face, but at my arm, grabbing my wrist with a manicured claw. Her nails dug into my skin. You ungrateful little bitch, she shrieked, her voice cracking. You were nothing. A piece of gutter trash Laura brought in. We gave you a home. We gave you a name. And you've been sitting there collecting notes? She was pulling at my arm, trying to get to my bag. I yanked it back. You think this is yours? She snarled, her face contorted. This name, this house, this money, it was never yours. It belongs to the blood. It belongs to Logan. You are just a parasite. Vanessa, stop, Grant said, his voice weak. He was stunned by her ferocity, by my revelation. No, she screamed at him. You let her get away with this. You were always weak for her. You should have cut her off the day Laura died. Darren would have known what to do. Darren would never have let this thing stand here and threaten us if he were alive. A dead silence fell in the room. Logan froze. Grant's head snapped up. But it was Harold who moved. He did not get up, but his head, which had been bowed, rose slowly. He turned his gaze on Vanessa, and his eyes were not frail. They were sharp, analytical, and cold. He stared at her, a silent, damning accusation. Vanessa realized what she had said. Her hand, still gripping my wrist, went slack. The name hung in the air. Darren. She had said the secret part out loud, in her rage. She had confirmed the one thing Grant never, ever wanted to consider. She let go of my arm. I could feel the hot, deep lines where her nails had broken the skin. She backed away, smoothing her silk blouse, trying to regain her composure. I am just upset. She is trying to tear this family apart. I think, I said, rubbing my wrist, that this family was torn apart a long time ago. I'm done here. I grabbed my bag and walked out of the study. I did not run. I walked past the portraits of Grant and Vanessa, past the trophy cases, and out onto the grand front porch. I was fumbling for my keys, my hands shaking with adrenaline, when the door opened behind me. Brielle. It was Harold. He was standing in the doorway, leaning heavily on his cane. "Grandfather," I said, my voice still shaky. He walked out onto the porch, the sunset catching the silver in his hair. He looked old, but his eyes were alive, burning with a new, terrible energy. "She meant it," he said. "It was not a question. About Darren." I looked at him. This man who had sat silent for 15 years, this man who had watched me be diminished, erased, and abused, and had never said a word. "Yes," I said, "she meant it." He nodded, as if I had just confirmed the final detail of a long, complex equation. He looked at the marks on my arm, the red half-moons her nails had left. "He's a fool," Harold said, more to himself than to me. "I raised a king, and he became a petty, blind tyrant." He turned his gaze on me. It was penetrating. "You've been holding that back. What you said in there, the emails, that's not the real weapon, is it?" I just looked at him. "You look like her," he said softly. "Like Laura. She always had a vault. She never played a card unless she knew she had the ace. What's your ace, child?" He paused, then asked the question I had been waiting for my entire life. "Did you ever check? Did you ever bother to check the blood they're all so obsessed with?" This was the moment, the final turn. I could walk away, keep my secret, and let him go back to his silent corner, or I could trust the man my mother had trusted. I made my choice. I reached into my bag. I pulled out the copy of the Project Legacy file, the report, the NDA, the 2 summary pages. I did not give him the originals. I was not stupid, but I gave him the truth. I handed the folder to him. "You should sit down." He took it, his hand surprisingly steady. He sat on one of the porch swings and opened the folder. He did not read the charts. He, like me, went straight to the summaries. I watched his face. I saw it move through 100 emotions in a minute. I saw confusion as he read the 0% for Logan. I saw the dawning, horrific understanding as he saw the name Darren Mercer correlated. I saw the deep, profound grief. Then, he turned the page. He read my summary. Paternity confirmed, 99.9%. He did not gasp. He did not cry. He just stopped. He closed the folder very, very slowly. He stared out at the perfect, manicured lawn, at the empire Grant had built on a lie. His shoulders began to shake, but it was not from sobbing. It was from a cold, silent rage that seemed to emanate from the ground up. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. The frail, papery rasp was gone. It was the voice of the man who had founded the company, the man who had put up the first $1 million, the man who had been erased. "I have let that boy," he said, his voice like gravel, "play king for far too long." He stood up, the folder in his hand. "You are not to use this," he said, tapping the folder. "Not yet." "What?" I said, stunned. "Grandfather, that is the proof." "It is a bomb," he snapped, "and you do not drop a bomb without first securing the blast radius. I have work to do. I have 30 years of shareholder agreements and dormant clauses to review." He looked at me, his eyes now clear and hard as diamonds. "I will handle my part. You will handle yours. Go to your wedding, get married, smile for the cameras, be the daughter Laura raised you to be. And then?" "And then," he said, a cold smile touching his lips, "we will give them the truth, in public, in front of everyone they want to impress. We will give them the blood they are so proud of." He put a hand on my shoulder. "Stay safe, Brielle, for the next week. Just be safe. Your stepmother is a cornered animal. Do not be alone with her." He went back inside, leaving me on the porch. That night, Harold Vaughn did not go to bed. He went to his own study, in his own house. He pulled out ledgers from the 1990s, and he made a phone call. He called an old, semi-retired attorney named Arthur Cole of the firm Langley & Cole. It was the firm Grant now used, but Arthur had been Harold's man first. He had drafted the original bylaws of Mercer Transit Group. Harold asked him to find the fail-safe clause, the one they had written in 1995, detailing the penalties for moral and financial fraud committed by a primary executive, including a clause about misrepresentation of an heir. A clause Grant had forgotten existed. I did not know any of this. I just knew that I had an ally. And so I went to my wedding. I put on the dress. I walked down the aisle. I smiled as Grant prepared his speech. I let him think he was in control. I let him deliver his killing blow. And when Vanessa followed me into that hallway, her face twisted with triumph. I was ready. I was ready for the slap. I was ready for the shove. I was ready for her to call me a fake. Because as I covered my face, as I saw my grandfather standing in the shadows, I knew what that look in his eyes meant. It was not just the anger from a week ago. It was the immediate, visceral fury of seeing his son's wife, the mother of an illegitimate child, physically assaulting his own true-blooded granddaughter, the last living piece of his daughter, Laura. It was the last piece of evidence he needed. When he pulled out his phone, it was not a threat. It was an execution. He was not just calling a lawyer. He was calling the man who held the keys to the kingdom, and he was giving the order to turn the key. The week leading up to the wedding was not filled with dress fittings or cake tastings. It was filled with the sound of shredders running in executive offices and the quiet, suffocating pressure of a corporate coup. 3 days before I was set to walk down the aisle, a company-wide memorandum was sent out to the 4,000 employees of Mercer Transit Group. It was flagged as high priority. I read it on my phone while sitting in my car in the company parking lot, a place I was rapidly becoming unwelcome in. The subject line read, "Strategic Leadership Announcement." The body of the email was a masterclass in corporate buzzwords. It announced the immediate appointment of Logan Mercer to the newly created position of Director of Succession and Strategic Vision. It cited his fresh perspective and his innate understanding of the Mercer legacy. It did not cite his cumulative grade point average, which I happen to know was a 2.4, or his work experience, which consisted entirely of summer internships where he showed up at 11 in the morning. I stared at the screen, Director of Succession. It was a title that meant nothing and everything. It was a signal to the market, and more importantly to the board, that the Crown Prince was being fitted for his crown. 2 hours later, I received a second email. This one was addressed only to me, from the head of Human Resources, a woman named Karen who had always been kind to me but was terrified of Grant. The email was brief. It stated that due to my upcoming nuptials and my transition away from the core business family, I was being removed as the lead consultant on the Riverfront Logistics Hub project. The reason given was potential conflict of interest and need for personal time. The Riverfront project was mine. I had found the site. I had negotiated the zoning variances with the city council. I had drawn every beam, every loading bay, every cantilevered roofline. It was the most advanced design Mercer Transit had ever commissioned, and they were taking it away from me 48 hours before a critical investor presentation. I did not reply to Karen. I did not call Grant. I put on my blazer, checked the battery on my phone, and walked into the building. I knew there was a presentation scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon with Arden Horizons. They were a massive international conglomerate looking to partner with a U.S. logistics firm for a new shipping route. The Riverfront Hub was the bait. I walked into the conference room 10 minutes early. Grant was not there yet, but Logan was. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car, pacing nervously, flipping through a slide deck that I had created. When he saw me, he stopped. "You're not supposed to be here, Brielle," he said, his voice tight. "Dad said you were off the project." "I designed the project, Logan," I said calmly, taking a seat in the back corner, away from the main table. "I am here to ensure the technical questions are answered, unless you finally learned how to calculate load distribution ratios last night." He flushed red. I don't need to know the math. That's what we pay engineers for. I'm the vision guy. Before he could kick me out, the door opened. The delegation from Arden Horizons walked in. Leading them was Mr. Sato, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who had a reputation for suffering no fools. Grant entered right behind them, smiling his politician smile. When Grant saw me in the corner, his smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He shot me a look that promised retribution, but he could not make a scene in front of the investors. He gestured for everyone to sit. The presentation began. Logan stood at the head of the table, reading directly off the slides. He stumbled over technical terms. He called the automated sorting system a robot thingy before correcting himself. It was painful. Mr. Sato did not look impressed. He looked bored. Then, we reached the slide about the architectural sustainability features. This was the selling point. The building was designed to be carbon neutral. Mr. Mercer, Sato interrupted, looking at Logan. This rainwater reclamation system integrated into the foundation. It is quite unique. Can you explain how it handles the freeze-thaw cycle of a Chicago winter without cracking the concrete? The room went silent. Logan froze. He looked at the slide. He looked at Grant. Grant opened his mouth to intervene, but Sato held up a hand. Please, Sato said. I asked the project director. Logan swallowed hard. Well, he stammered. It's a very strong concrete, the best. We don't use cheap stuff. It was an answer a 5-year-old would give. Sato frowned. He looked down at the blueprints in front of him. He pointed to the signature block in the corner of the page. The name here, Sato said. B. Vaughn. Is this the lead architect? Grant cleared his throat loud enough to rattle the water glasses. Mr. Sato, B. Vaughn is just a freelancer we utilized for some drafting work. She is not part of the core leadership team. Freelancer? Sato asked. The design is cohesive. It suggests a single vision. She is a consultant, Logan interjected, finding his confidence again now that he could punch down. Actually, she is sort of a family charity case. My parents wanted to give her a chance to build a portfolio, so we let her sit in on the big meetings. But the ideas, the concepts, those are Mercer legacy. I felt the heat rise up my neck. Charity case, freelancer. I slid my hand into my blazer pocket. My thumb found the record button on my phone. I knew the laws in Illinois were strict about recording conversations, but I also knew the exceptions my mother had drilled into me. In a business meeting with third parties present, where the door is open and minutes are being taken, the expectation of privacy is significantly lowered, and when the conversation turns to defamation and fraud, the law often looks at intent. I pressed record. So, Sato said, this B. Vaughn is not responsible for the engineering integrity? No, Logan said, laughing dismissively. God, no. She's an artist, not an engineer. We just let her put her name on it to help her out. You know how it is. You try to help family, even the ones who aren't really family. I see, Sato said. He did not look convinced, but he dropped the subject. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. As the Arden executives filed out, Grant hung back, his face thunderous. He marched over to my corner. Get out, he hissed. If you ever show your face in a client meeting again, I will have security drag you out by your hair. You lied to them, I said, standing up. You told them Logan designed the system. If that foundation cracks because he doesn't understand the specs, you're liable for millions. I am liable for nothing, Grant shouted. Because I am the CEO, and you are nothing. Go home, Brielle. Go play bride. He stormed out. Logan remained behind, packing up his laptop. He looked at me, a smug grin plastered on his face. You heard him, Logan said, loud enough for the administrative assistants outside the open door to hear. Go home, Brielle. And honestly, you should be grateful. Most families wouldn't let their charity project stand in the same room as a billion-dollar deal. You are the most expensive tax write-off my dad ever had. The outer office went dead silent. 3 secretaries, 2 junior analysts, and the janitor all stopped what they were doing. They looked at me. They looked at Logan. I saw the shame in their eyes, not for me, but for him. They knew who did the work. They had seen me here at midnight. They had seen Logan come in at noon. But they had mortgages. They had kids. They looked down at their desks, typing at invisible keyboards, terrified to witness my humiliation in case it became contagious. I recorded that silence, too. I walked out of the building with my head high, but my hands were shaking. I drove straight to a coffee shop 3 blocks away, put on my headphones, and listened to the recording. Logan's voice was clear. The most expensive tax write-off. Not really family. It was brutal. It was ugly. And it was perfect. While I was being humiliated in the conference room, another meeting was taking place across town. I did not learn the details of this until later, but it was the turning point of the entire war. Harold Vaughn had summoned 2 men to the private lounge of the Union League Club. These were not young, hungry executives. These were men in their 70s, men with liver spots on their hands and steel in their spines. They were the last 2 original board members of Mercer Transit Group, men who had invested in the company when Grant was still just a smiling salesman in a cheap suit. Harold sat them down. He ordered a pot of coffee, and then, without preamble, he placed a copy of the Project Legacy file on the table. He walked them through the DNA results. He showed them the theft of the riverfront design. He showed them the financials that proved Grant had been siphoning company funds to cover Logan's gambling debts and consulting fees. Grant is planning to hand the company to a fraud, Harold told them. He is cutting out Laura's heir, the only person who actually knows how to read a blueprint, to give the keys to a boy who thinks a truss is a medical device. The board members were old-fashioned. They cared about dividends, yes, but they cared about order. They cared about the sanctity of contracts, and they despised being lied to. "What do you need from us, Harold?" one of them asked. "I need you to be ready," Harold said. "Grant is going to make a move at the wedding. He is going to announce the succession publicly to force your hand. I need you to stand with me when I push back." Back at the Mercer estate, the atmosphere was festive, but it was the festivity of a guillotine execution. Vanessa and Grant were in the library, drinking expensive scotch. They were rehearsing Grant's wedding toast. "You have to sound regretful," Vanessa instructed, pacing the room. "You can't sound angry. You have to sound like a heartbroken father who has no choice. Say something like, 'We tried so hard to include her, but some bonds just aren't meant to be.'" "I'll say she rejected us," Grant suggested. "I'll say she wanted to break away. That way, cutting her out of the will looks like respecting her wishes." "Perfect," Vanessa said, clinking her glass against his. "And then, once the shock settles, you pivot to Logan. You announce him as the future. The crowd will be so relieved to have a stable heir. They won't even question the adoption thing. They were scripting my destruction. They were planning to use my wedding, the day that was supposed to be about my future, to bury my past." The night before the wedding, we had the rehearsal dinner. It was held in a smaller ballroom at the hotel. The tension was so thick it felt like humidity. Logan was drunk before the appetizers were served. He was wandering around with his phone, live streaming to his followers. He came up to me while I was talking to Eli's parents, trying to apologize for the awkwardness of the impending weekend. Logan threw his arm around my shoulder, his breath smelling of bourbon. "Smile for the fans, Brielle," he shouted, holding the phone up. "Here she is, the bride, my unofficial sister, the almost Mercer." He laughed, pulling me into a headlock for the camera. "You guys, can you believe she's actually getting married? We didn't think anyone would take her off our hands." Eli stepped forward, his fists clenched, but I put a hand on his chest. "Don't," I whispered. "Not yet." I looked directly into the lens of Logan's phone. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at him with the flat, dead eyes of a predator watching its prey injure itself. "You're hilarious, Logan," I said. "Enjoy the party." "Oh, I will," he sneered, pulling away. "It's the last party you're ever going to be invited to." He posted the video. I saw it 10 minutes later. The The caption read, "Walking the charity case down the aisle, Mercer Empire Real Air." The company's social media team saw it too. I saw the view count climbing. He was publicly mocking the woman whose designs were currently being pitched to international investors. He was creating a digital footprint of his own malice. I went back to my hotel room early. I did not sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my silver clutch. It was a beautiful bag, covered in crystals. It was meant to hold lipstick, a compact, maybe some tissues for happy tears. I emptied it out. I took the folded copy of the DNA results from Project Legacy. I slid it into the back pocket of the clutch. I took the printed transcript of the recording from the conference room. I folded it and slid it in. I took a copy of the shareholder agreement Harold had given me, with the fraud clause highlighted in yellow. I slid it in. I took the photo of Logan's TikTok post. I slid it in. The clutch was heavy. It bulged slightly. I snapped it shut. The clasp made a decisive click, like the sound of a chamber being loaded. Grant and Vanessa thought the wedding was their stage. They thought they had written the script, cast the actors, and directed the ending. They thought they were going to walk into that ballroom and erase me with a few well-chosen lies about blood and belonging. I placed the clutch on the nightstand next to my veil. If they wanted to talk about blood, I was ready. If they wanted to talk about who really belonged, I was ready. If they wanted the truth to be told in front of 400 people, I would give it to them. But I wasn't going to tell them the truth they expected. I was going to tell them the truth that would burn their house to the ground. The ballroom of the Rivercrest Grand was not designed for a wedding. It was designed for a coronation. The ceiling soared 40 feet high, draped in white silk and crystal chandeliers that dripped light like frozen rain. Every table was a masterpiece of white lilies and silver cutlery, arranged with the geometric precision of a military parade. It was beautiful, it was expensive, and it was completely hollow. I walked into the room with my husband, Eli, on my arm. The cameras flashed instantly. These were not just the hired wedding photographers. These were stringers for the city society pages, bloggers for local lifestyle channels, and the internal media team from Mercer Transit Group. Grant had turned my wedding into a press event. I smiled. It was the smile I had practiced in the mirror for 3 days. It was polite, vacant, and gave away absolutely nothing. My dress was heavy, the silk dragging slightly on the marble floor. But the heaviest thing I carried was in my right hand, the silver clutch. It felt like I was carrying a brick of lead. I squeezed it tight, the metal biting into my palm. It was the only thing anchoring me to the earth. Grant was already working the room. I watched him from the edge of the dance floor. He moved with the easy, predatory grace of a man who believes he owns every square inch of space he occupies. He was wearing a tuxedo that had been custom-made in Italy, and his laugh boomed over the sound of the string quartet. He stopped at table 4, where the city alderman and his wife were sitting. I could read his lips perfectly from years of watching him operate. He was telling the story of how he built the company from a single truck. He was leaving out my mother. He was leaving out Harold. He was rewriting the mythology of Grant Mercer in real time. Then he gestured to the bar, where Logan was holding court. Grant beamed. He clapped a hand on the shoulder of a bank executive and pointed to Logan, mouthing the words, "My son in the future." I felt a wave of nausea, but I swallowed it down. Vanessa was holding her own court near the cake. She was wearing a dress that was technically silver, but looked dangerously close to white under the lights. Around her neck was a necklace I had never seen before, a cascade of diamonds that must have cost more than my first 3 years of college tuition. I moved closer, ostensibly to greet a cousin, but really to listen. Vanessa was leaning in to whisper to Mrs. Albright, the wife of a real estate developer. Vanessa held a champagne flute in one hand and gestured with the other. "It is such a relief, honestly," Vanessa said, her voice low but carrying that sharp, gin-soaked edge. "This is the last time we have to pretend. After tonight, we can finally focus on the legacy." Mrs. Albright looked uncomfortable. She glanced around, her eyes landing on me for a split second before darting away. She knew something was wrong. Everyone in the room could feel the static in the air, like the pressure drop before a tornado touches down. But she did not ask. In our circle, you did not ask questions that might ruin the party. You just drank the champagne and watched the crash. I continued my walk to the head table. I passed the bar. Logan was there, his tie already loosened, his face flushed with drink and arrogance. He was surrounded by a group of his friends, young men who wore boat shoes and had never worked a Friday in their lives. Logan was leaning back against the mahogany counter, a glass of scotch in his hand. He was speaking loudly, oblivious to the world around him. "Enjoy the open bar. Boys," Logan shouted, "seriously, drink it dry, because after tomorrow, things are going to change. We are trimming the fat." His friends laughed. One of them slapped him on the back. "Everything is going to belong to the people who actually deserve it," Logan continued, slurring slightly, "to the people who actually have the blood. No more charity cases. No more pretending that paper makes you family." He raised his glass. "To the real Mercer bloodline." He drank. He did not notice the young catering server standing 3 feet away, holding a tray of empty glasses. The server had a phone tucked into his vest pocket, the camera lens peeking out, recording every word. I caught the server's eye. He looked terrified that he had been caught. I gave him a barely perceptible nod. "Keep recording." My eyes said, "Do not stop." We sat for dinner. The first course was a lobster bisque that I did not touch. The second was a filet mignon that looked like a prop. I sat next to Eli, who was gripping my hand so hard I thought he might break my fingers. "Are you ready?" he whispered to me. "I am ready," I said. Then, the music stopped. The lights dimmed, focusing a single, harsh spotlight on the stage. Grant walked up to the microphone. He adjusted the stand. He looked out at the 400 guests, his face composed into a mask of solemn paternal love. He tapped a spoon against his glass, the sound echoing through the silent room. "Good evening, everyone," Grant said. His voice was rich, warm, the voice that had closed 1,000 deals. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate this day. It is a beautiful day, a day of new beginnings." He paused for effect. He looked at me. "I want to say a few words from the heart, from a father's heart." The room leaned in. They expected a toast. They expected a story about my childhood, or perhaps a joke about how much the wedding cost. Grant smiled, but it was a smile that did not reach his eyes. "I have raised Brielle since she was a little girl," he said. "I have given her a home. I have given her an education. I have given her the Mercer name to open doors that would otherwise have been closed to her. I have tried. God knows I have tried, to love her as my own." The air in the room changed. It went cold. This was not the cadence of a wedding toast. This was the cadence of a eulogy, or an indictment. "But," Grant continued, his voice hardening, "there comes a time when we must face the truth. There comes a time when we must acknowledge that biology, that blood, is a bond that cannot be replicated by simple legalities." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People exchanged glances. Was he drunk? Was this a joke? Grant did not stop. He was gaining momentum now. "It has become clear to me, and to Vanessa, that Brielle has chosen a path separate from this family, and so, tonight, in the spirit of honesty, I am announcing that I am respecting that choice." He took a breath. "Brielle is not my biological child. She was adopted. She is not of my blood. And while I have supported her for 30 years, that support ends tonight." The silence was absolute. It was a physical weight, crushing the breath out of the room. "Effective immediately," Grant declared, staring directly at the camera crew, ensuring they caught his good side. "I am severing all financial ties. I am also filing a petition with the court tomorrow morning to review the will of my late wife. Laura, it is my duty, my fiduciary duty to this family, to ensure that the assets of Mercer Transit Group remain with the true Mercer bloodline." He pointed to the table where Logan sat. "We must protect the legacy for those who truly carry it." It was brutal. It was a public flaying. He had invited 400 people to watch him strip his daughter of her inheritance and her identity. I sat perfectly still. I did not look down. I did not cry. I looked straight at him. The shock in the room broke. A woman at table 6 stood up, grabbing her purse, her face pale with secondhand humiliation. A man near the back booed, a low, angry sound. But most people just sat there, paralyzed by the spectacle. And then, the phones came out. It started with 1 or 2, then a dozen, then 50. People were live streaming. They were recording. The wedding of the year had just turned into a reality TV massacre, and the internet was hungry. Vanessa was standing next to Grant on the stage. She looked sad. She looked devastated. She wiped a non-existent tear from her eye. But she was wearing a small lapel microphone, clipped to her dress for the wedding video. She thought it was muted. She leaned toward Grant, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "The truth always hurts, darling," she whispered, "but it had to be done. Now she's gone." Her voice boomed through the speakers. The audio technician, paralyzed by the drama, had forgotten to cut her feed. Now she is gone. The crowd gasped. Vanessa's head snapped up, her eyes widening as she realized her mistake. At the VIP table, Logan stood up. He was swaying slightly. He thought this was his moment. He thought this was the victory lap. He raised his glass high. "To Dad!" he shouted, his voice slurring but loud enough to carry to the back of the room, for finally having the guts to say it. At least now everyone knows who the real heir is. Everyone knows who the real son is. He drank his scotch in one gulp and slammed the glass down. The murmuring grew louder. It was ugly. It was the sound of a crowd turning. They were not turning on me. They were looking at the stage with a mixture of horror and disgust. Grant had miscalculated. He thought he would look strong. Instead, he looked like a monster. But he did not care. He thought he had won. He thought I would run out of the room crying. He thought I would hide. I slowly pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the marble floor. Grant looked at me. He expected tears. He expected a tantrum. I stood up. I smoothed the silk of my skirt. I picked up the silver clutch from the table. I began to walk toward the stage. The room fell silent again. The only sound was the click of my heels on the stone. Click, click, click. Grant watched me come. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. He saw my eyes. They were dry. They were cold. I walked up the stairs to the stage. I stood next to him. I was almost as tall as he was in my heels. He pulled the microphone away, trying to shield it, but I reached out and took it from his hand. He was too surprised to stop me. I looked out at the crowd. I saw the faces of the city's elite. I saw the cameras. I saw the red lights of the recording devices. I looked at Vanessa, who was pale beneath her makeup. I looked at Logan, who was smirking in his drunken haze. I smiled. "If we are going to talk about the truth," I said, my voice steady and clear, amplifying through the massive hall, "and if we are going to talk about blood," I unsnapped the silver clutch. "Then perhaps I should add a few documents to the record. My name is Brielle Vaughn Mercer, and yes, I have the paperwork to prove every single word of that name." My voice did not tremble. It echoed through the cavernous ballroom, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and the terrified faces of the 400 guests. I stood center stage, the microphone in one hand, my silver clutch in the other, beside me. Grant Mercer looked as if he had been struck by lightning. He opened his mouth to speak, to cut my microphone, to call security, but the sheer audacity of my presence paralyzed him. I reached into the clutch. The metal snap sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I pulled out the thick blue-bound envelope embossed with the silver logo of GenAxis Biolabs. I held it high, turning it slowly so the light caught the wax seal, so the people at the front tables, the judges, the bankers, the society gossips, could see the official insignia. "This is not a wedding speech," I said, my tone conversational, almost pleasant. "This is an evidentiary hearing." I looked at Grant. 7 years ago, My father, Grant Mercer, initiated a secret project. He called it Project Legacy. He was concerned, as he told you all tonight, about the purity of his bloodline. He wanted to ensure that his empire would only pass to a biological heir. So, he commissioned a series of covert DNA tests. He tested his son, Logan, and he tested me. I paused. Grant's face drained of color. He recognized the folder. He knew exactly what it was, but he was confused because he thought he knew what was inside. He thought it was his weapon. He did not know it was his execution warrant. He believed these results were destroyed. I continued, but thanks to the integrity of Dr. Mira Collins, the chain of evidence was preserved, and the results are quite illuminating. I opened the folder. I pulled out the first summary sheet. Let us start with Logan, the heir apparent, the man who just toasted to the real blood. I looked at Logan. He was still standing by his table, his glass halfway to his mouth, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. In 2017, GenAxis Biolabs compared Logan Mercer's DNA against Grant Mercer's. The probability of paternity is 0%. The room gasped. It was a sharp, collective intake of breath. Grant stumbled back half a step, gripping the podium for support. "That is a lie!" Vanessa shrieked from her side of the stage. Her voice was shrill, bordering on hysterical. "That is a forgery!" I ignored her. I turned to the next page. However, the lab was thorough. They ran a secondary comparison against the familial database to see if there was any relation at all, and they found a match, a 99.9% match. I looked directly at Vanessa. Her eyes were wide, terrified. She knew what I was about to say. Logan is not Grant's son. Logan is the biological son of Darren Mercer, Grant's younger brother. The silence broke. It shattered into 1,000 whispers. I saw the realization hit the older guests, the ones who had known the family for decades. I saw Mrs. Albright cover her mouth. I heard a man at table 3 say, "My God, the fishing trip." Vanessa and Darren were at the lake house that summer. The pieces fell into place for everyone at once. The timeline, the resemblance, the tragic accident that killed Darren before the truth could come out. Grant had raised his nephew as his son, unaware that his wife had betrayed him with his own brother. Grant turned slowly to look at Vanessa. His expression was not anger. It was a total, catastrophic collapse of understanding. He looked like a man who had just watched the sky turn green. "Darren?" he whispered. The microphone caught it. It was the sound of a man dying inside. But I was not done. I turned back to the crowd. Grant has spent 30 years telling me I am an outsider, that I am a charity case, that I am not his real kid. I pulled out the second sheet. The irony is that in his obsession with blood, he forgot to check his own. I held the paper up. Brielle Vaughn, probability of paternity with Grant Mercer, 99.9%. I turned to Grant. I looked him in the eye. "I am your daughter. I am your biological child. Mom and you had me before the marriage, and you adopted me to protect me from your divorce. You knew this. You signed the papers. But you lied to yourself for so long that you actually started to believe I was the stray." I leaned into the microphone. "The only person standing on this stage with your DNA, Grant, is the one you just disowned in front of half of Chicago." The room was in chaos. People were standing up. The live stream comments, visible on the phones of the guests in the front row, were scrolling so fast they were a blur. "Fake!" Logan screamed. He charged toward the stage, stumbling over a chair. "It's fake! She printed that at home. She's a liar." Before security could move, a figure stood up from table 8. It was Dr. Mira Collins. She was wearing a severe black suit, and her presence commanded immediate attention. "I am Dr. Mira Collins, Director of GenAxis Biolabs," she announced, her voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "I personally conducted these tests in 2017. I personally verified the samples. I personally oversaw the chain of custody. The documents Ms. Vaughn is holding are original, certified, and admissible in any court of law in the state of Illinois." Logan stopped. He looked at Mira, then at the crowd. He saw that no one believed him. He saw the pity in their eyes. He wasn't the heir anymore. He was just the evidence of an affair. Then, movement from the shadows. Harold Vaughn stood up. He did not look frail tonight. He gripped his cane like a scepter. He walked up the stairs to the stage, his steps slow but relentless. He stood between me and Grant. Harold looked at his son. He looked at the man who had built an empire on arrogance. "I paid for Project Legacy," Harold said. His voice was gravel and steel. "I suspected the truth about Logan for 20 years. I saw Darren in him, but I needed proof. I told Laura to keep the file. I told her that one day, we would need it to save this company from a lie." He turned to the audience. He addressed the board members sitting at the center table. "As of this moment," Harold declared, "I am invoking Article 7 of the Mercer Transit Group Shareholder Agreement. This clause states that any transfer of controlling stock based on fraudulent misrepresentation of lineage is null and void." He pointed his cane at Logan. "That boy is not a Mercer heir by the definition of the trust. The transfer of shares Grant attempted to authorize is illegal." He turned to me. "The company reverts to the terms of Laura Vaughn's original will, which names Brielle Vaughn Mercer as the primary beneficiary and rightful successor. It was a legal checkmate. In 5 minutes, the power structure of the last 30 years had been vaporized. But I wasn't finished. The law was Harold's weapon. The court of public opinion was mine. I signaled to the audio-visual technician in the booth. He was a young guy named Kevin who I had helped with a coffee run earlier that day. He didn't like Logan. He hit the button. The massive screens behind the stage, which had been displaying a loop of happy family photos, flickered. Suddenly, an email appeared. It was blown up to 10 feet tall. From Grant Mercer. Brielle Vaughn. Subject, Award. Do not forget that you are not blood of this house. Keep your expectations low. A gasp went through the room. Seeing the cruelty in black and white, projected on a giant screen, was visceral. The image changed. It was a video. It was Logan, drunk at the rehearsal dinner, his arm around my neck. "You guys, can you believe she's actually getting married? We didn't think anyone would take her off our hands." The crowd watched the video, Logan. They saw the malice. They saw the bullying. Another clip played. This was the audio recording from the conference room with Arden Horizons. The screen showed the audio waveform moving. Logan's voice. "She's an artist, not an engineer. We just let her put her name on it to help her out. You know how it is. You try to help family, even the ones who aren't really family." I looked at the representatives from Arden Horizons, who were sitting at table 2. Mr. Sato looked furious. He realized he had been lied to directly. He realized the incompetence he had sensed in the meeting was real. "Stop it!" Vanessa screamed. She lunged for the microphone I was holding. She was unraveling. Her perfect hair was coming loose, her face twisted in an ugly snarl. "This is a private matter," she yelled, her voice screeching through the speakers. "You cannot do this. This is family business." I pulled the microphone back, dodging her grasp. "Family business?" I asked. I looked at her cold. "You made it public when you invited the press. You made it public when you let your husband disown me on a live stream." I turned back to the technician. "And you certainly made it public when you decided to assault me in the hallway of this hotel, 10 minutes ago." I nodded to Kevin. The screens went black for a second. Then, the security footage appeared. It was grainy, but it was clear. It was high-definition color video from the hallway camera outside the bridal suite. The room went deathly silent. On the screen, everyone saw me standing in my wedding dress. They saw Vanessa approach. They saw her corner me. Then they saw the slap. It played in slow motion on the massive screen, Vanessa's hand connecting with my face, my head snapping back. Then the shove, Vanessa pushing me into the vanity table. Then the screaming. There was no audio on the security feed, but her rage was visible in every pixel. And then, the camera angle shifted slightly. In the corner of the screen, a figure appeared in the shadows. It was Harold, The audience watched as the old man stood there, witnessing the violence. They saw him reach into his pocket. They saw him pull out his phone. The video froze on that frame. Vanessa mid-scream, her hand raised to strike again, and Harold in the background, the phone to his ear. "That," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the silent room. "That is the moment the Mercer Empire fell." I pointed to the screen. "You asked who dialed the number that destroyed you. Vanessa? It wasn't a competitor. It wasn't a journalist." I looked at Harold, who was standing beside me, his head high. "It was the man who built the roof you were living under." Vanessa stared at the screen. She stared at the image of herself, distorted by rage, exposed to the entire city. She looked at Grant, but he wouldn't look at her. He was staring at the floor, broken. I lowered the microphone. "The wedding is over," I said, "but the lawsuit? That is just beginning." The video on the massive screen remained frozen, capturing the exact millisecond of Vanessa's rage. It loomed over us like a digital gargoyle, a testament to the violence hidden beneath the silk and diamonds. The room was so quiet that the hum of the projector fans sounded like a jet engine. Harold Vaughn did not look at the screen. He looked at the crowd. He held the microphone with a steady hand, his knuckles gnarled but strong. "The call you saw me make," Harold said, his voice projecting with a clarity that cut through the tension. "That was not to the police. It was to Arthur Cole, my personal attorney." Grant looked up, his eyes bloodshot. He knew Arthur Cole. Arthur was the man who had written the original corporate charter, the man who knew where every skeleton was buried because he had helped dig the graves. 20 minutes ago," Harold continued, "Arthur filed an emergency motion with the district court. He has petitioned for an immediate injunction against the transfer of any Mercer assets, citing gross fraudulent misrepresentation of lineage and breach of fiduciary duty." He paused, letting the legal weight of his words settle over the room. "He has also formally requested an emergency session of the Mercer Transit Group Board of Directors for tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. The agenda is singular, a vote of no confidence in the current CEO. Grant stepped forward, his voice shaking. "You cannot do that. Dad, you are retired. You do not have the votes." Harold turned to his son. The look on his face was not anger, it was pity. "I still hold 30% of the voting stock. Grant, and unlike you, I have not spent the last decade treating the board like my personal servants." Harold looked out at the center table, where the two senior board members sat. They had watched the DNA presentation. They had watched the video of the assault. They had seen the email evidence of the bullying. "Gentlemen," Harold said to them, "do I have a second for the motion?" Both men stood up immediately. "Motion seconded," the older one said clearly. "We will see you at 8. Harold." Grant collapsed back against the podium. It was over. The boardroom coup had happened in the middle of his daughter's wedding reception, broadcast live to the internet. But the dismantling of the Mercer facade was not finished. Mr. Sato, the representative from Arden Horizons, stood up from table 2. He buttoned his suit jacket with precise, angry movements. He walked past Grant without even looking at him. He walked past Logan, who was slumped in his chair, staring at the empty air. He walked straight to me. "Ms. Vaughn," Sato said, bowing slightly, "Arden Horizons values integrity above all else. We do not do business with liars, and we certainly do not do business with incompetent management." He glanced back at Logan with open disdain. "We are suspending all negotiations with Mercer Transit Group effectively immediately. However," Sato continued, his eyes meeting mine, "we are very impressed with the riverfront design. It is brilliant work. If your studio, Vaughn Studio, is open to a direct consultation, we would like to discuss retaining you as the principal architect for our North American expansion." I looked at Grant. He heard every word. He watched as the biggest contract of his career walked away from him and offered itself to the daughter he had just disowned. "I would be honored." "Mr. Sato," I said, "call my office on Monday." As Sato walked away, A commotion erupted near the entrance. The double doors swung open, and 4 uniformed police officers marched in. They did not look like they were there for security. They looked like they were there for business. Vanessa straightened up. She smoothed her dress, her face composing itself into the mask of the victim. She assumed, as she always did, that her last name was a shield that could deflect any consequence. "Officers," she said, her voice trembling with fake distress. "Thank goodness you are here. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. My stepdaughter is hysterical, and—" The lead officer walked right past her outstretched hand. He stopped in front of me. "Ms. Vaughn?" he asked. "We received a call regarding an assault." I nodded. I pointed to the screen, where the video of Vanessa striking me was still frozen. "That is the footage. Officer, and I would like to file a formal report for assault and battery." Vanessa gasped. "You wouldn't dare. Brielle, this is a family matter. We do not involve the police." I looked at her, the woman who had tormented me for 15 years, the woman who had lied about my father, lied about her son, and lied about me. "You are right, Vanessa," I said. "We do not involve the police in family matters. But you are not my family. You are just the woman who hit me." I turned to the officer. "I want to press charges." As the officers moved to escort Vanessa out, not in handcuffs, but firmly, with a request to accompany them to the station for a statement, the room watched in stunned silence. The social queen of Chicago was being led away from her own party, leaving a trail of humiliation in her wake. Logan stood up. He looked at his mother being led away. He looked at the DNA results still projecting on the screen. 0%. He looked at Grant. "Dad," Logan whimpered. It was the voice of a child. "Dad, tell them it's not true." Grant looked at the boy he had raised. He looked at the face he had always claimed was a Mercer face, and for the first time, he really saw it. He saw the nose that wasn't his. He saw the eyes that belonged to his dead brother. The betrayal hit him all at once. His wife had slept with his brother. His son was his nephew. His daughter, the only one who was truly his, was the one he had thrown away. Grant did not speak. He did not reach out to comfort Logan. He simply turned his back on him. He walked off the stage, down the stairs, and out the side exit, a man disappearing into the dark, leaving his empire and his illusions behind. The room was heavy with the wreckage of the evening. Guests were whispering, some standing to leave, others glued to their chairs. I felt a hand on mine. It was Eli, my husband. He had stood by me through the entire showdown, his presence a silent anchor. He squeezed my hand. "It's over," he whispered. I looked out at the crowd. Half the room was gone. The fair-weather friends, the sycophants, the people who were only there for the Mercer influence. But the other half remained. My friends from college, my employees, Eli's family, Harold. I picked up the microphone one last time. "This was supposed to be a wedding," I said. "And you know what? It still is." I looked at Eli. "We paid for the band, we paid for the food, and I am not going to let them steal this night from us, too." I turned to the crowd. "If you are uncomfortable with the truth, the doors are open. Please feel free to leave. But if you are here for us, if you are here for Brielle and Eli, then please, sit down, eat the cake, and let's dance." For a second, no one moved. Then, Harold Vaughn began to clap. It was a slow, rhythmic applause. Then Eli's parents joined in. Then my staff. Then the whole room erupted. The band, sensing the shift, struck up a fast, joyous jazz number. The tension broke. The people who stayed were the people who mattered. We danced on the marble floor, right under the screen where the evidence of my liberation had been projected. I danced until my feet hurt, and for the first time in my life, I didn't care who was watching. The next morning, the sun rose over a different world. I did not go to the Mercer offices, but I heard what happened. The board meeting lasted exactly 20 minutes. Grant tried to argue, but the combination of the DNA evidence, the fraudulent transfer attempts, and the pending assault charges against his wife made him a liability the company could not survive. The vote was unanimous. Grant Mercer was removed as CEO. Harold was appointed interim chairman to oversee the transition. His first act was to freeze all transfers to Logan and to order a forensic audit of the last 10 years of company finances. Logan did not show up to work. His access badge was deactivated by 9 a.m. The last I heard, he was trying to sell his story to a tabloid, but without the Mercer money to back him up, no one was interested in the complaints of a fraud. Grant retreated to the estate. He was alone. Vanessa was staying at a hotel, her legal bills mounting, and with the prenup, Grant was undoubtedly enforcing. She was facing a future that looked very different from her past. As for me, I went to work. My office was small. It was a converted loft with exposed brick and drafty windows. But when I walked in on Monday morning, the phone was ringing. It was Arden Horizons. Then it was a developer from the city. Then a logistics firm from Detroit. They didn't want the Mercer daughter. They wanted the woman who had designed the riverfront hub. They wanted B. Vaughn. 3 days later, I was sitting at my desk. The afternoon sun was streaming in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. On the wall, I had hung 2 new frames. The first was a copy of the DNA summary. Paternity confirmed, 99.99%. I didn't hang it because I wanted Grant to be my father. I hung it because it was the truth. It was the proof that I was not crazy, that I was not a liar, that I was not a mistake. The second frame held a single sheet of paper from the probate court. It was the order confirming me as the sole beneficiary of the Lila Vaughn Trust and the rightful owner of her 20% stake in Mercer Transit Group. There was a knock on the door. Harold walked in. He was moving better today, relying less on his cane. He looked 10 years younger. He did not apologize for Grant. He knew that some sins are too big for apologies. He simply walked to my desk and placed a thick folder on top of my blueprints. "What is this?" I asked. "It is a contract," Harold said. I opened it. Joint venture agreement between Mercer Transit Group and Vaughn Studio. I scanned the terms. It was not a handout. It was not a family favor. It was a rigorous, arm's-length business contract. It outlined a partnership where my studio would handle the design for the new sustainable logistics division. The rates were fair. The expectations were high. "There are no favors in there," Harold said, sitting in the chair opposite me. "No nepotism, no charity. If you fail, I will fire you." I smiled. It was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever said to me. "But," he added, his eyes twinkling, "I don't think you will fail. You are your mother's daughter." I picked up a pen. I didn't just sign it blindly. I read every clause. I checked the indemnity section. I double-checked the payment schedule. Harold watched me, a look of pride on his face. I signed at the bottom, Brielle Vaughn. I handed the contract back to him. "Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Chairman," I said. "Pleasure doing business with you, Ms. Vaughn," he replied. He left, closing the door softly behind him. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out over the Chicago skyline, a city of steel and glass and concrete. I saw the buildings my mother had loved. I saw the river where my new project would be built. I thought about Grant, sitting alone in his big, empty house, obsessing over blood that wasn't his. I thought about Vanessa, realizing that her beauty couldn't pay legal fees. I thought about Logan, learning for the first time what it meant to actually have to earn a living. They had spent my whole life telling me I didn't belong. They had tried to erase me. But as I looked at my reflection in the glass, superimposed over the city I was helping to build, I realized they were wrong. I didn't need to be his real kid. I didn't need his name, or his approval, or his money. I had the truth. I had the papers. And I had the one thing they never had. I had a foundation that I built myself, and that is the only legacy that lasts. Thank you so much for listening to this story on the Lila Revenge Stories channel. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below with your location, and let's chat about what you would have done in Brielle's shoes. If you enjoyed seeing the truth come out, please hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more satisfying stories, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people.